Welcome back, and this is Lecture 3 for Module 1 in EDD 918. And what I wanted to cover in this is just kind of wrap up our content here. I'm hoping this video might be just even a little bit shorter than the last one. I was pushing my 15-minute max that I've set for myself in the last video. But just, wrapping up thoughts here about the intro to organizations. And the first thing, after we talked about hierarchy and flat organizations, that I want to mention is, and I have a slide there with the different types of organizations. And as you look at that, and I'm not going to go through each one of these because I know I would assume you're pretty familiar with all of these types or most of these types of organizations. But the reality is, what I want to kind of drive home with that slide is most of us, if not all of us, are part of multiple organizations and multiple types of organizations. So for instance, you may work for a for-profit organization and volunteer at a nonprofit organization, and then you're also part of a religious organization. So you get the idea. Or you may work for a nonprofit and then volunteer for a different nonprofit. And then you're part of the Clarkson organization as a student, even as, depending on where you live as a remote student, an online student, and you live far, far away from Omaha, Nebraska, you're still part of that organization. And there are certain decisions made at Clarkson that affect you and impact you, right? If tomorrow they announce we're closing down the EDD program, that would leave you in a bit of a lurch. By the way, they're not going to do that. But that's just an example where we're all part of multiple organizations. So that's why I have that slide there, just because, again, when I realized early on when I taught courses in organizational communication is mainly where I taught, but pulling in org behavior and things like that, I realized many students had in their brain organization was synonymous with business, as in for-profit. Because I would start talking about organizations and I'd have a student say, well, this doesn't really apply to me. And I'd say, why not? And they'd say, well, I'm going to work for a nonprofit. Like, oh, isn't it a nonprofit organization? And again, all, different parts of our lives. Or I'd have somebody say, well, I'm going to be a small business owner and I'm going to be the only employee. Like, maybe. You never know. It might grow. I'm like, plus, are you a part of, and, do you go to a church somewhere? Do you, or a faith group of some kind? Do you volunteer, right? Again, are your kids going to play Little League? You're part of an organization. So, again, just that idea. There are multiple types. And so as we're even going through this course, I'd encourage you to think about that, the different organizations you're a part of and how what we're studying applies to them and perhaps applies in different ways. Some may have more hierarchy, some may be more flat. And so it's just, I think, a great opportunity there. And then as we think about the types of organizations, that next slide, and I don't have a heading on it, I just use this slide, and you see the three pictures on there, and I'm going to walk through these pretty briefly. But this is to illustrate how organizations and organizational life is very much transitioning and changing. And, some people like to say, well, back in the 20th century, things didn't change that much. Then all of a sudden, we've had this explosive change. I'm not sure I would agree with that. I think technologically we can make that argument, but from an organizational life, maybe not, because the 20th century was full, and we'll see that as we go through in Module 2. We're going to talk about some of the history of organizational life and things like that. You're going to see there's a lot of change there as well. But what we've seen kind of recently is a couple of things affecting organizations as a whole, and then that other picture with the Occupy Wall Street movement. I'll get to that in a minute. But I have the picture of the globe and the money, just because globalization, right? Globalization is huge. And how all of the companies, organizations were so intertwined to the point where I usually use the illustration to say it is hard to find any organization that is not somehow reliant upon or connected internationally. Um, it just, you don't find it. And I have a brother-in-law who, and this was years ago, but we drive a lot of Toyotas in our family. I just like Toyota cars, but he would give me a hard time. Oh, why don't you, drive an American-made car? And I said, well, do you know where I had a Toyota Sienna at the time, a van. I said, do you know where that was made? Well, overseas. I said, no, it was made in Indiana. They have a factory there. I can't remember the name of the town right now. But that's where all Toyota Siennas that are sold in the U.S. are manufactured. So my Toyota, even though it's a Japanese owned company, is very much American made, and American workers made the car. So how is that any more American or less American made than something that was made by GM in Detroit back in the day? So that's what I mean. Globalization, we're all connected. And again, with software and things like that, plus even nonprofits, we're connected with others around the world, and how are they doing things? So globalization. And then the picture there of the robots that kind of look like from Terminator movies or something, kicking the guys off their job. This is a huge concern right now, right? AI. How is AI going to replace humans? Will it replace humans? And what does that mean for jobs and things like that? I don't have the answer to that. But it's a part of organizational life. And so it's something being talked about and being discussed, and it affects even what we talk about in this course. And then I have the picture of Occupy Wall Street. I know that's an older movement now, right? It's probably been, 15, 16 years ago that was going on. But it's still, it stands out to me as a good example of how organizations change and grow and have to adapt, and what that does to them, even from a mission and purpose. So just a real quick story about Occupy Wall Street. So if you're not familiar with the Occupy movement, it started with Occupy Wall Street. It spread. There was an Occupy LA, and they even tried one here in Lincoln, Nebraska a little bit. Didn't work, we're not big enough. But there were different Occupy movements, mainly focusing on the big cities. Occupy Wall Street, most well known. And it was a protest against banks and the wealthy elite controlling money and things like that. Well, what happened was this. So the Occupy Wall Street, it started growing. The movement started growing. People were camping out there, living there as protest. And what happened was there were needs. People needed to buy some food, do laundry, things like that. Well, people who wanted to support the cause of Occupy Wall Street started donating money. Large sums of money, 6 figures they were getting in. And so they had this money. Well, now all of a sudden, the Occupy Wall Street is in a difficult spot from the standpoint of, well, if we're going to have donations being given, who should manage that? Well, that means we need a leadership structure. So now this grassroots movement that was really kind of protesting the hierarchical organizations now has to start forming some sort of leadership, because who controls the money? Not only that, where do we keep the money? We need to keep it in a bank so it's safe. So now are we compromising our moral principles because we're protesting banks, and now we got to put our money in a bank? And then what happened was, and I heard all this from an NPR story, what happened was the Occupy LA people called the Occupy Wall Street people, and they said, hey, we heard you've been getting donations. Hey, we're really struggling out here. Could you send some of that money that you're getting out to help us with some of our needs? And there were some of the people at Occupy Wall Street who were like, yes, for sure, you're part of the cause. But there were others who were like, whoa, money was given to us. So again, it just goes to show how these grassroots movements start to struggle with organizational life and dynamics and politics and everything else. Which then leads me to the last slide. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. And really, this last slide is just kind of a visual walkthrough of what we're looking at here. So and it'll go counterclockwise. So you have the house. The house is the structure of the organization, whether that be, and again, we're going to talk about how humans form and everything else. So don't think, as in literally brick and mortar, but organizations have structure. You have to have structure. There's just no way around it. Otherwise, we could argue you're not an organization. So the house represents organizational structure. And then I've got the guy there, the yellow guy running out in front. Someone has to lead in an organization, even if we're wanting to be as flat as possible. Someone has to be the leader. We have found that, and so, and I would say this. You've heard the old statement: "Power abhors a vacuum." If no one is designated as a leader will rise, and sometimes that leader isn't the best person. So somebody needs to be leading the organization. However, what we want to make sure, though, is we don't forget the people. And that's kind of those last two aspects. The first one, that picture of a team. The people work together. Organizations are made up of humans, are made up of people. We work together. If that aspect isn't there, then it's hard to have an effective organization. And then that last slide is kind of meant to be kind of the communication. And how does that happen? Through human interaction, which is communication. And so again, this slide is just to kind of represent the different aspects about organizational life, and that we'll be covering in this course: the structure and the systems, the leadership aspect and how that works, the people involved and how do we treat them and think about that, and how do the people work, and then how is that all formed through communication and human interaction. So hopefully this has been a helpful introduction for you, and looking forward to jumping into Module 2, where we're going to talk about kind of the history of organizational thought and development of the field of study.